Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So we are now in the no man's land of the offseason. It's been a month since free agency and the draft. We still have like a month until I'm going to really start diving into my 2025-2026 season predictions. So this is where it gets wacky. This is just where we start rampantly speculated on this page. And I thought I'd bring back a series I did like over a year ago at this point and look at and predict the next 10 years, who I think the worst team in the NHL finished 32nd or maybe 33rd or 34th once we get Atlanta and Houston probably in the next decade in the NHL. So yeah, a lot of rampant speculation involved. For the first like 4 to 5 years, I can back it up with some logic in terms of the way that these teams are trending. After that, it's going to get a little bit wonky, but I thought it'd be fun. And up first, we're going to look at what my list looked like this time last year, because it has changed a sizable amount. This is what it was last year. Sharks, I actually got that correct. Then Flames for back-to-back seasons. I'm sure their fans would honestly like that. The best shot at McKenna and DuPont. That ain't going to happen with Dustin Wolf in net. 2028 Penguins, 2029 Predators. That's trending pretty decent. Those teams might be listed on this. 2030 Capitals. This was, of course, before their absolutely insane offseason. Then getting Cole Hudson in the draft and then having the amazing year. So aged poorly, but also a lot has changed in the last year with the Capitals. The Lightning in 2031. That was a decent shout. 2032, the St. Louis Blues. This was before the offer sheets, before some of their young guys balled out. So they're not going to be on this, as well as 2023. My Islanders, after getting Matthew Schaefer, Eklund, Aitchison, some other moves like Richie, they're not going to be on this. And then the Florida Panthers in 2034. So without further ado, let's start it off with 2026. And I'm going with the San Jose Sharks. When looking at them, I feel like some people are decently high on this team because they are going to have a decent amount of internal growth from guys like Celebrity, Smith, Eklund. But when looking at this team last year, this was a 52-point team that traded their starting goaltender midway through the season in Mackenzie Blackwood, traded their number one defenseman in Jake Wallman at the deadline, as well as Granlund a month before the deadline, who has been a consistent like 65-point guy for the season and a half that he was on the San Jose Sharks. So they were the clear worst team in the NHL last year by 9 points behind the Chicago Blackhawks, and moved all those guys. The goalie tandem, unless Askarov takes a big step alongside Ned, not going to be very good. The defense core was already the worst in the NHL last year. Lost Wallman. They did sign Orlov, but I don't think that's an improvement. They're still going to absolutely stink. The top six is going to be fun. The bottom six is not looking very good for the San Jose Sharks. So when looking at them, I think that they might take a solid step. And I looked at prior years when looking at 2019. The Senators were the worst team in the NHL, but they only had 64 points. That'd be a 12-point increase for the San Jose Sharks, and there was no other teams below 70 points. So I think we might have something like that on our hands, considering the Chicago Blackhawks did not sell as much last year at the deadline, only really sold Seth Jones and got Spencer Knight in return, as well as the fact that they're going to have a lot of internal growth. Pittsburgh hasn't sold enough to make me think that they're going to really stink next year. So I think just kind of by default, it has to be the San Jose Sharks. I said that they were going to finish last this time last year, and I was correct on that. And I'm going to stick by it. They need one more year of kind of stinking it up. Then next offseason, I think, is when they're going to really start going for it in terms of making big leaps after getting another top 5 pick. So the San Jose Sharks are my pick for the worst team. In 2026, 2027, I do have the Pittsburgh Penguins here when looking at it, whether it's this offseason still, next year's trade deadline, next year's offseason, or the 2027 deadline. They need to trade at least 2 of Carlson, who only has 2 years left at $10 million. Rust and Raquel have 3 years left at $5 million roughly. I think Rust is 5.125. So they need to move those guys and actually commit to this tank. I think that it will eventually happen over the next 18 months. And with getting Malkin, they said apparently they're not going to offer him a contract after this season, so they're not going to have a second line center of his caliber. They have some solid young pieces right now, but I don't think in 2 years that McGroarty, Koivunen, Brunicki, Kindle are going to be real impact guys. They're going to stink come 2027. Sidney Crosby, he hasn't regressed the last couple of years, but surely in another 2 years, he'll still be very elite, but no longer a top 15 player in the NHL, unless the goalie tandem of Mershov and Blomqvist, who I do think are one of the better goalie prospect tandems in the entire NHL, really hit the ground running. This team's going to be ass by 2027. And I also have them as my 2028 worst team in the NHL for those exact same reasons. Although their young core will start playing at the NHL level around then, unless they get like Gavin McKenna in 2026, I really don't see a team that's more of a safe bet to absolutely suck come 2028, considering how old their core is Right now, I think after that 2028 season, they'd come out of their rebuild and start to emerge. They'd probably land one of DuPont, McKenna, or who's the other guy in 2028, Maddox Schultz. But yeah, there's going to be some dark times in Pittsburgh relatively soon, and the NHL will probably reward them as a result. In 2029, this is where I'm going to go with the Nashville Predators. When looking at their current team, Yossi Stamkos and Marchessault are all 35 years old. Ryan O'Reilly's 34 years old. Even like their young core pieces, Forsberg and Saros, are 30 and 31 years old. So the core of this team is pretty goddamn old. In 4 years, they are going to be mostly washed up at that point. I like some of their guys in their prospect pool. It's an above average prospect pool. Forgot exactly where I had it, but I think it's probably like 11 to 17 range. But it's a lot of quantity over quality. I don't expect Brady Martin, Matthew Wood, Tanner Molendyk, Riker Lee, Cameron Reed, David Enstrom, Joakim Kamel, Yegor Surin, or Teddy Stiga to be like elite players in 4 years to make up for the production lost by some of their top of the lineup guys right now that are going to be regressing. So I think that they're going to need like true franchise pieces. If you throw in 2 top 3 picks with the rest of their prospect pool, which is a lot of quantity, you maybe can have something at the start of the 2030s. But yeah, Barry Trotz probably going to get fired in like 2 to 3 years. The guy that comes in, or woman, is going to have to just completely nuke it for the most part and move on from the Yossi, from the Saros, and the Forsberg core and just kind of go through a decent rebuild that Trotz probably should have done when he got the job. I have the Nashville Predators finishing in dead last in 2029. In 2030, we start getting a little bit wacky. Those first 4 picks were rather safe. I'm going to go with the Buffalo Sabres in 2030. I made the giant video on it. Go check it out. The 37-minute long rebuild review on the Buffalo Sabres 2.0. It's not looking that good, and it would not surprise me if in 2 to 3 years, Rasmus Dahlin, who has at that point would have put in 10 years in the organization, Tage Thompson as well, just say like, I want to win. I'm still in the prime of my career. I can go win a Stanley Cup somewhere else, much like Eichel and Reinhart eventually got traded in 2021. So with the way that they're trending right now, unless Zach Benson constantly in his own power absolutely hit, I think Buffalo is steamrolling towards yet another rebuild relatively soon. And if these guys decide, maybe they're the most loyal people of all time and decide to stay in Buffalo. But if they don't, it's going to get ugly relatively quick in Buffalo because Tage Thompson and Rasmus Dahlin are the really only stars on this team right now. And if they want it out, you're probably only getting futures assets for them and looking towards the future in terms of yet another rebuild. In 2031, another bold pick. I got the Vancouver Canucks here. I think it's like a coin flip that Quinn Hughes leaves in the 2027 offseason, whether that's New Jersey, whether that's somewhere else. And I think that the owner after that would just try to maintain this team with guys like Pettersson, Besser, Hronik, Demko, Garland, Marcus Pettersson, and DeBrusk because they're all in like their late 20s, early 30s right now. I think they try to like maintain that for 2 to 3 years and then eventually would have to admit that it's time to rebuild it if you're the Vancouver Canucks. I like some of their young guys in Lekkerimaki, in Willander, in Coots. Do I think that like Nashville, they're going to be high-end elite guys? Probably not. So with Vancouver right now, it just seems like they're kind of in no man's land right now. And if Quinn Hughes decides to leave, it's going to get ugly relatively quick. Obviously, if Quinn Hughes signs a long-term deal, I don't expect them to be the worst team in the NHL when Quinn Hughes is still 30, 31 years old. But in this scenario, being a little bit bold, not just going straight chalk, going with the Vancouver Canucks in 2031 to be the worst team in the NHL. In 2032, this one's a little bit more chalk. I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Lightning. When looking at them, their young guys within the team right now are Brandon Hagel, who's 27 next month, and Braden Point, who's 29 years old. So even if Kucherov, Vasilevsky, who are 32 and 31 years old, age very good, in 7 years from now, they are going to be washed up. Hedman and McDonough will be like 2 to 3 years into a retirement, considering they're 35 and 34 right now. So yeah, this Tampa core, I think they're going to have another 2 to 3 years of high-level contention, and I don't expect Kucherov to fall off a cliff at like 34, 35 years old. But yeah, we're talking 7 years from now at this point, and there's no team that has more of an old competitive core with not that much in terms of young guys right now than the Tampa Bay Lightning. So they check in at 2032. At 2033, going with the New York Rangers. I'm sticking in the Eastern Conference. When looking at them right now, they obviously have older guys like Panarin, Zibanejad, Gavrikov, and JT Miller, who might be out of the NHL by 2033, as well as Shesterkin and Fox. Shesterkin's 29 years old. Fox is 27 years old. So even those guys would be out of their prime by 2033 by a decent amount. Lafreniere, is that going to be your next generation of guys? Lafreniere, Will Cooley, Perreault, EJ Emery, Malcolm Spence. It doesn't move me that much. 2 to 3 years ago, you thought maybe they had the guys to kind of transition into that next generation with Lafreniere, with Kakko, with Keandre Miller, Philip Hedl. But that has just really not worked out in terms of that transitional plan because they kind of rushed through their rebuild. So I think come 2031, come 2032, they might just say, we got to rebuild it. We got to build it the proper way instead of rushing it like we did. And of course, they did have a decent amount of success. They made 2 Eastern Conference Finals, but I could see them kind of blowing it up come 2031, come 2032, and by 2033, being the worst team in the NHL. At 2034, 2 more to go. I'm going another bold one. I'm going with the Seattle Kraken. I think that they're just a perfectly average team right now. I like their U25 more so their prospect pool right now, but it doesn't move me that much. So I think not similarly to a Buffalo, but I think in 4 to 5 years, they're kind of going to reach an inflection point of some of their guys reaching their prime, like Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, Berkeley Cadden, and just not being good enough. And I think they'd have to hit the reset button. I'm not a fan of the Ron Francis and Botterill core, especially defensively, what they have in terms of young guys. Like Riker Evans is 23 years old. They have Blake Fiddler. Outside of that, they really don't have much. So I'm not too encouraged of the next decade plan by the Seattle Kraken. Outside of Cadden, I really don't see, and they have Jake O'Brien as well. I don't see any true star emerging, and even Berkeley Cadden, I'm not saying it's a sure thing that he becomes a star. He's the only guy that has real star potential for me, but the rest of this team is just pretty aggressively average. DeCourt is already 28, 29 years old. So I'm going with the Seattle Kraken kind of tearing it down in 2034. And then lastly, to finish it off, the Florida Panthers. I'm picking them to stay in the last spot possible. Right now, they have an amazing core of 27 to 30-year-olds, basically exclusively outside of like Brad Marchand, Swarovski, and Lundell. But even Lundell's like 23 years old at this point. So yeah, they're going to have another 5 to 6 years of high level contention. During that high level of contention, they're probably going to trade every single pick and prospect known to man to try to compete now. So come 2035, and again, by that, Anton Lundell will be 32, 33 years old. So yeah, everybody's going to be either about to retire from the NHL or retire from the NHL. And I think Bill Zito at that point will like have to accept a rebuild and kind of tear it down. And by then they might have 3, 4 Stanley Cups, and it'll be well worth it. But it's sometime Father Time comes for an overall core, and I think it would happen to the Florida Panthers. So here it is in all its glory. Am I absolutely crazy for having the Sharks, the Penguins twice, the Predators in 2029, Sabres in 2030? Then we got Canucks, Lightning, Rangers, Kraken. I feel like that's going to piss some people off. In the Florida Panthers, let me know in the comments, what other teams do you think are going to absolutely stink win? I'm going to eventually do the Stanley Cup, next 10 Stanley Cup champions, probably in like a month or so when I kind of have my Stanley Cup pick for the 2026 season. I don't want to just throw something out there right now and then kind of switch it up in 2 months when I do my actual predictions, because we still have a long way to go in this offseason. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Peace. Also, no manager Monday tonight. Next week, I'll be doing the Pittsburgh Penguins, but tomorrow, Tier List Tuesday.